Hello, and welcome to episode 50 of TBR, the To Be Read podcast, where we talk about the books we love and the topics that interest us. My name is Patrick Stemp, and as always, I have Michael Ronn and Jamie Maltman with me. How you guys doing?
Hey, Patrick. How are you tonight?
Good. So we're sorry for starting a few minutes late. We're having some Google fun tonight. Hopefully everything works out now that we're live. And tonight we're going to be talking about post-apocalyptic fiction and maybe some just straight-up apocalyptic fiction as well. And we'll start off by doing our reading roundtable for the week, and we'll start with Michael.
Okay. Well, I am back into fiction this week. It took me forever to get back into it, but I started by reading a lot of short stories, actually. I read the latest issue of Clark's World, which is a sci-fi and fantasy. It's like in one of the premier sci-fi and fantasy magazines out there, and the story in Clark's World was that I really liked was For the Love of Sylvia City, and it's actually a post-apocalyptic story, and it's about this Earth. The people on land are having a war. They're using carbon weapons and pretty much destroying the face of the Earth, and so a lot of people have retreated to a city underneath the ocean or underneath the surface, and the main character is trying to repair cables that connect the dome that protect this ocean city, and in the process there's a bombing, and she discovers a little boy that gets knocked into the water, and she saves him, and there's this mental back and forth because if she risks herself to save him, she could risk the safety of the city. So it was a really well-written story, and the interesting thing is that Clark's World does their stories, or they do at least one story every issue as an audio. So there's an actual narrator that reads it, and it was interesting because I actually listened to the story. I didn't really read it. And so listening to it, it was really awesome. I guess I loved the language, and I loved the character work. And when I went back to read it, it was funny because it's probably, like, if I had just read it, I probably would have put the story down. So, like, it just goes to show you how much of a difference, like, a good narrator makes when you're reading an actual story. So that was one of the things that I read. I also read some more writer-based nonfiction from the Right Stuff bundle with Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, and one of the books that I read was Playing the Short Game by Douglas Smith, and that is basically a book it's how to market and sell short stories. And I've never read a book quite like this. This was probably one of the coolest books I've read in a long time. Like, it really got me energetic about selling short stories, like, and actually making money from it. Like the way he outlines it, I mean, he walks you step by step exactly how to sell short fiction, and there's really never been a book that goes step by step in that great detail. So, if you guys, I mean, Jamie, we're going to be writing short stories, but anyone listening, and you too, Patrick, at writing short stories at some point, this is definitely a book I would recommend. Teaches you really how to go about it as a professional. And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, what was that called again?
Playing the Short Game by Douglas Smith. Very awesome book. And I also read some short stories in Lightspeed magazine. And there was a story there, Goodnight Earth by Annie Belay. And I believe she's a Hugo winner. And she was actually nominated for a Hugo this year.
No, we're not talking about the Hugos this year.
No, we're not. We're not. And I'm just saying this to say that she actually withdrew from the Hugos for the same reasons we're not talking about the Hugos. So kudos to her, right? So that's the only way I was going to mention her. But it was a good story. It was a good story too, and that was via audio as well. So I like that. I think that's really interesting to listen to short fiction in audio. That's kind of like, I can't imagine not doing it now. So I hope more magazines do it because it's really cool.
She did a cool interview with Simon Whistler, right, on Self-Publishing Roundtable.
She might have been on there.
Yeah, I listened to that one. It was pretty neat.
Not Self-Publishing Roundtable.
Sorry, not Self-Publishing Roundtable. Sorry.
Rock and Self-Publishing.
Rock and Self-Publishing. Yeah. Wrong acronym. Trying to transform.
Yeah, she's got quite a few books out. She's got some short stories.
20-Sided Sorceress was the
20-Sided Sorceress. Yep. And then she's got an epic fantasy series as well, the Griffin Pike. So. Yeah, I like that one a lot too. So that's my week.
Okay, how about you, Jamie?
I finished, there we go, the there's the Unlondon by China Miéville. It has actually some pretty cool, like it's got little illustrations here and there inside too, some funny stuff. So, but it's like I said, I would describe it as Neverwhere. So it's like an alternative underneath London with all sorts of wacky stuff going on, with a lot more Alice in Wonderlandish type stuff, because it's just, you know, there's zany, weird things going on, like London buses that'll drive along and then a balloon will open up, or other London buses that crawl along on lizard legs over the buildings, and there's just all these just really weird, neat things. And it's definitely YA, like it's, you know, teenage girl protagonist type thing. But in some ways, I liked it better overall than Neverwhere, just in terms of the one issue, like spoilerish issue I have for Neverwhere is just that the protagonist is not terribly active. A ton of stuff happens to him over the course of the book. He does, you know, he'll still act at some points, but not a whole lot. Whereas the protagonists are acting proper, you know, or act like normal protagonists in terms of choosing to do stuff and figuring stuff out and being the ones that solve problems or push the story forward in a lot more, like you would expect in a normal story. And really, that's the only thing that I have any issue with Neverwhere, because I really like the book and I love what's going on. And, but anyway, so this one was really a lot of fun. I liked it a lot. It's funny because the only other thing I'd read by China Miéville before was a short story from one of those annuals. And just when I went in to look at the Goodreads reviews, while I was leaving my very good review of this one, I saw a couple of 1 stars by people saying that they love China Miéville's work and thought this was, you know, it's like, oh, I guess because it's YA, he had to dumb it down a little bit, and it's not as good, and I just think this is garbage. And it was, so if you're a big China Miéville fan, maybe this isn't the book for you. But if you like Neverwhere and you like these kinds of ideas of stuff, and it's not Neverwhere, like the story is totally different. It's a lot, and it's not as dark in terms of the stuff that's happening as Neverwhere. But if you like that sort of thing, with, you know, this more twist, like weirdo twisted stuff that's like sort of a little bit silly, but, you know, fun, whimsical stuff like that, almost anime-like, really, in a lot of ways, then you might like that a lot, and I did. And that was actually recommended by a fan of the show, Amber Butchram. She actually had recommended it to me through Goodreads, and I read the blurb and said, wow, that does sound really cool. And so thank you again, Amber, for that recommendation, because I liked it a lot. And then I've continued to read that History of the Book in 100 Books, and I'm getting close to the end now. And it's been really neat. Every little section, something new that you learn about. Like, I think I was just reading today about how popular the Newgate calendar or something like that, which was the descriptions of all the criminal trials happening in England at the time, and people used to eat that up and love to read that stuff. There's like the Old Bailey official one that was very sort of official and, you know, standoffish type reporting, but this one was more commentary on it and maybe a little bit snarky at times, and, you know, just you know, all the classes love to read that stuff, and it was published for like more than 100 years, and so there's just different stuff like that you might never have heard about, but gives you some neat ideas. And I've had some neat ideas even for stories related to stuff like censorship or stuff like publishing, or you know, in its early stages. So just neat stuff. I've enjoyed that a lot, and continuing to read my child's version of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales to my son, which he's actually been enjoying a lot, because they do them in a pretty funny way. So, and that was Marcia Williams.
Cool.
There you go. And that's my weekend reading.
A reread of Dean Wesley Smith's Writing into the Dark, which, again, I think we lost Michael, so hopefully he'll be back in a minute. So rereading that, which I think all three of us have read that at this point, and it's excellent. It's, like I said, it was a reread. I read it the first time when it was just a series of blog posts, and then he released the ebook last week, and I wanted to just kind of reread through that, both just to kind of refresh my memory on it, and also because you never know what's changed, and, you know, he might have added in some stuff. So I highly recommend that one. And then I finished reading His Dark Materials is the Amber Spyglass, and it was a great wrap up to the series. So the first book is fantastic from beginning to end. It could almost be a standalone, and the second one is, as I said last week, I think kind of suffers a little bit from being the middle book and not seems to be mostly just kind of set up for the third book. And the third book then, of course, is where all these things that are going on come together and wrap up in a really neat and interesting way. It wasn't until towards the end of book one, it becomes very, very clear. You have some inklings while you're reading it that it's going to be religious and anti-church. And
Patrick?
I know I definitely got that from the movie a little bit. Sorry, Patrick, you're pausing there for a minute. So you're saying that was why a lot of the fufara out there when it was coming out as a movie was because of the
right.
Religious
and I
commentary.
had seen something where people were saying, "Oh, the church stopped the second movie from being made," and I would say, "No, the first movie stopped the second movie from getting made." But it's and I don't, I know this. The books are classified as YA. I think there's definitely some themes and ideas in there that would probably go over the heads a lot of younger kids, and the story might get a little too convoluted for that. I could see the first book kind of maybe getting bored and lost in the second and third, especially the third book. 13, 14 years old maybe could probably get through it and enjoy it quite a bit. I'm glad I finally got through it. And that was my reading.
I did forget. I actually just started last couple of days another Brandon Sanderson book, The Rhythmatist, and so I'll be talking more about that in the coming weeks. It's another YA, or it is a YA by Brandon Sanderson, about people drawing chalk drawings that come to life. It's not Simon, but it's a whole school of people learning how to do that. So.
I remember Simon.
Yeah.
So let's move on to our topic, and Michael's back, so that's good. We're going to talk about post-apocalyptic fiction, and I think these guys said they wanted to talk a little bit about just straight-up apocalyptic fiction as well. So I've got a huge list here, so you guys.
I've got a list too. I guess maybe we should start by talking about.
Yeah, I could say the general. Like again, it's really something horrible happened to humanity, right? Like apocalyptic could be something horrible is happening right now to humanity, and we're dealing with it right now. And then post-apocalyptic is something horrible happened, and now what is society like? How are we dealing with it subsequently?
Most of the definitions seem to deal more with that an apocalypse is the revelation, necessarily the event, but usually lower down into the definitions, the one I found is sort of any universal or widespread destruction or disaster.
Yeah.
So let's talk about zombies.
Go for it. Where do you want to start with zombies?
I'm sure. And actually, that just reminded me literally that I didn't have World War Z on my list by Max Brooks, which obviously has to be there.
And right. I haven't read it. I haven't read the book, and I haven't seen the movie, but I've heard don't see the movie unless you have already read the book and know that this is something completely different.
They are. The only thing they have in common is the name.
Yeah.
The book is fantastic. I can't recommend it highly. I mean, it's the kind of zombie book that people who don't like zombie books enjoy. It follows a lot of different sort of stories throughout the zombie apocalypse. It's told as sort of like a history of how it happened and what was going on in different parts of the world, and just a great book in and of itself, aside from the fact that it's about zombies. And the series that I would mention on top of that, which is by Daniel H. Wilson, and there's 2 books in that series now, and I think the second one is Robogenesis.
Yeah.
And that it has a very similar feel to it, but of course it's robots and an evil AI that are taking over the world. And the first book kind of starts as it happens, and we get into the robot war. The second book picks up where the first book ends, and it's a great story as well. If you like your apocalypse more robot than zombie.
Yeah, I was going to say The Walking Dead
Hmm.
is obviously
I
a
had that
good
on my
zombie.
list.
Yeah, that's a good zombie comic. Um, Gosh, there's so many different kinds. I mean, there's not only zombies. I mean, there's robots, there's aliens, there's
Virus.
unexplained unexplained apocalypses that happen. You know, where you can go through a whole book and not have any idea what happened.
Like Yesterday's Gone, for example, where you're
Yeah,
not really sure exactly what it is. It's kind of zombie-ish in it the way it seems. It's kind
right.
of alien-ish. It's
Or,
kind of plague-ish.
or
There's all these elements there, but it's definitely apocalyptic because it's happening right now, right?
Yeah,
Like,
well, I also like where you do know what happened, but where, excuse me, sometimes they can explain things a little too much, and you know
yeah,
exactly, like The Stand. In Stephen King's The Stand, you know exactly what happened, like down to like a play-by-play, minute-by-minute, how this virus got out there. One of the
and
other
I
books
like that in it too, right? Like I
sure,
read the super.
but sometimes the mystery is nice too,
I
and
agree.
one of the books I had on my list was 1 Second After by William Forstchen, I think it is, and that's one where we're attacked, or America at least is attacked by an EMP, and these people living up on this mountain. I mean, they have no idea how widespread the attack was, who it was that attacked, what the heck is going on anywhere else in the world. All they can really do is deal with their own little sort of city on this mountain and protect themselves from other people, and so it really focuses on the events after the apocalypse. And for all they know, it isn't an apocalypse for a while, right? Was it a small area that got hit? Was it worldwide? Just America? Who did it? Right? And that's a great story as well.
Yeah. There's another story or another book that I read that kind of comes to mind, and this one is actually Revelation, Angel Fall by, gosh, I can't remember the author's name. I'll have to look it up. But Angel Fall, and it's basically it's a YA novel, and it's basically angels come to Earth, and basically humanity. How the whole book starts is that angels come to Earth and humanity kills Gabriel, and angels come basically get their revenge on humans, and are basically laying waste to everything. And it's kind of a little like Hunger Games, and it's about a heroine who's trying to save her sister, and so they're traveling across the United States, and she meets a fallen angel, and there's a love story and that sort of thing, but you never really get a sense of why the angels are coming. Like, obviously, you would think Revelation, but it's really not quite Revelation, because things don't happen quite the same way as they do in the Bible. So that was an interesting one. And I don't know, that was one book where I think that probably a little bit more explaining would have been nice. Like, I think, you can have too much explaining, but you can also have it where, okay, you got to tell me what happened, Like, I think it stays a little too close to the characters, and not, there's not as much world building.
Is that Susan E? Is that the one?
Yeah, Susan E. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And there's two. I think there's 2 books out in that series right now, and there's supposed to be a 3rd one.
So I think I was going to mention a couple things. First of all, with YA, and I'll mention this as well. That we don't want to mention, because once you say they're post-apocalyptic,
Then you're.
and
then
I'd say
that's it.
we're not going to mention the one we were talking about before the
Yeah,
show, but
yeah.
The Veronica Roth series that we don't like to talk about. And then I think, Michael, you and I think The Loners by Lex Thomas.
Yep, that's a good
Last
example.
year, so that's another one. That's a great YA one where these kids are just in high school one day, and all of a sudden, for some reason, they don't understand the black helicopters come in, and there's an explosion.
Mm.
And they basically spend the next year kind of living the high school life but being unable to leave, and they've got no internet, no cell phone access outside the school, and it's actually a pretty brutal story. It's pretty violent.
Yeah.
And I know there's a sequel. I'm not sure how many there are, but I haven't read the next book in the series, but it's one that I would definitely check out.
Yeah, that's definitely kind of your standard virus story, and that's not really a spoiler, but I mean, ultimately it's that these kids, they are able to withstand the virus, which is why they're being quarantined.
And another one that I would say has been around long enough that shouldn't be a spoiler at this point, but of course it always will be for someone, is Hugh Howey's Wool series. So the Wool, the 5 books in the Wool. There's 3 in Shift, and then the last one is Dust. And
I've still only read the first story. I've got the rest of the first omnibus that I haven't read yet, but absolutely good example.
And that's another one where something's going on, and even when you find out that, I guess it's not you find out pretty early on that they're locked away from the world, but you don't know why. And it isn't really until you're into Shift and then even Dust when you really get to find out exactly what the heck is going on. And that's a great series.
Yeah,
I was just going to say, since we're mentioning Hugh Howey, I would also mention Go Back to Zombies and mention his short story, I, Zombie. I guess it's more of a novella. Have you guys read that one?
No, I've just heard I've heard the references from the someone who says it's the best book. Like it was like an agent or something that said, or an editor that said that was the best book he's written. But it's something that he wrote for himself, not for anyone else to read. He always says
I think he tongue in cheek kind of also says that he doesn't want people to read it or something. It's extremely brutal. It's a world where zombies, where the people who are now zombies are still conscious inside their heads and forced to watch everything that their now zombie body does. So they are looking through their zombie eyes as their body eats people alive, and there's a lot of disgusting stuff that goes on in that book. But if you like zombies, a lot of gore, it's a really Here's one that's a little bit different. This is one that I wasn't sure I should include. How about Watership Down?
Okay.
By Richard Adams. It was certainly a bunny apocalypse.
Yeah, that's true.
It wasn't not the end of the world, but the end of their world. And I think that's where I was looking up the definition, to any universal or widespread destruction or disaster. So I think that would certainly apply.
True. Yeah, and kind of in that same vein, a book that I mentioned a few months ago, a graphic novel I read, The Glacier, by Nicolas de Crécy. Got it right this time, Jamie. Yeah, where it's this post-apocalyptic world where you don't really know what has happened. You just know that there's this expedition and they're in this icy area, and you think it's the Arctic, but it turns out to be France, Europe, and they're searching for the Louvre. And the Louvre is, underneath all the ice, and they're trying to restore the humanities. And turns out that all the stuff in the Louvre is alive, and it's kind of takes a anthropomorphic, weird kind of thing. It's kind of in that same vein in a little bit.
That makes me think then of one of the other ones that I had on my list, which was Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. Definitely post-apocalyptic, and I also kind of, I guess it's not destruction. I wanted to kind of include Timequake on that list too, but although it's a terrible event that happens, I don't know if you guys have read that one. That's where the clock turns back 10 years, and everyone on Earth is forced to relive the past 10 years of their lives with know that would necessarily be an apocalypse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's some that I had written down that it's like, oh well, they're not really post-apocalyptic, but you can kind of take them that way. Like one that I see on a lot of lists, I think there's a tendency to mix up post-apocalyptic with dystopian. Like
Mm.
they are very similar, right? And they have kind of the same tone, but they're not quite. Like I think I saw 1984 on a post-apocalyptic list, and I wouldn't call that
Huh.
post-apocalyptic. And then A
Like
Handmaid's Tale. Yeah,
it's the kind of thing where the apocalyptic event could be the the catalyst that
right,
allows this dystopia to appear, and there's some that
right.
are like that. But yeah, because even like well, again, I haven't read. I've only seen the first couple of movies for like Hunger Games.
That
But is that it's definitely a dystopian world, but is that a post-apocalyptic world?
no.
No, right? But
No.
people are always mentioning that one. So yeah, I say same sort of idea. Whereas Maze Runner, I did happen to see the movie that that's one based on the book that is both, right? I think you, Patrick, did you say you read it before, or
I read the first chapter.
and you didn't like it, yeah? but it's
I
definitely
was I was at the tail end of a I was starting to get sick of the YA there.
because it's definitely the movie is okay, like, and it's definitely dystopian with like moving towards post-apocalyptic at the end.
Okay, and I think so. One that definitely makes good use of both. Sort of we were saying it can be about the virus, and something else would be the Breakers series by
Mhm.
Edward Robertson, where it starts with a virus that wipes out most of humanity, and then the aliens come in to finish up the job. And I've read, God, I think he's up to 7 or 8 books in that series now, if I'm not
He's got quite
mistaken.
a few. Mhm.
Yeah, I've got the first three. I've only read the first one, but
And
it's
he's got a spinoff that's like a space opera, doesn't he? That takes
I
place
believe so.
like
Or
several hundred years in the future.
yeah, I've heard him talk about it on other podcasts. But I don't know if he's actually written it or released it yet.
Yeah, that's another good example. And that, gosh, another one that Ray Bradbury, The Martian Chronicles.
Mhm.
Like he only pays lip service to what actually happened. I mean, but it's a nuclear war on Earth, and that's why humanity goes to Mars. So it doesn't really have that feel of a post-apocalyptic story because all the stories take place on Mars for the most part, but it's there in the background.
I was thinking before the show. I was like, I wonder if The Martian could be considered post-apocalyptic. I mean, it was certainly an apocalypse for him.
Yeah,
This great big storm came and wiped Mars, except for him. He was the one guy left, and but might be trying to shoehorn that one in.
uh,
If
maybe.
if you like your, you know, I think 9 times out of 10 these days when we talk about post-apocalyptic, it's zombies or a virus
Yeah.
or those kinds of things. So if you like your apocalypse a little more nuclear, I would read Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Um, that's a nuclear war, and if you like Stephen King especially, I would read it if you enjoyed The Stand. It is a nuclear war that sort of takes out the planet, but there are huge elements of mysticism and call it magic, things that are going on that are sort of otherworldly as well, and it's a brick, but it's well worth reading. I enjoyed it a lot.
Cool.
I can't think of. I mean, I think most of the examples that I have, and probably because they kind of proliferate the market these days, is zombies, aliens, and viruses.
Yeah, that's the seems to be the trend.
Or robots. I suppose I would include
Yeah, to a lesser extent. Yeah.
nanobots in that as well, and I won't tell you what series that was.
Yeah. I'm just looking through my list here of other ones that I kind of had. I Am Legend.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Sure.
I Am Legend. I mean, since we're talking about movies and books that were movies, that's a good one. I haven't read the book, but I've heard that the book is far better.
Far, far, far better.
Yeah.
And
And I
complete.
actually enjoyed the movie.
Although when it's one of those movies I think that was of its time, right? It probably wouldn't hold up now.
Yeah.
But I would. The book is a ton better. Totally different take on the story than what you get in the movie, and it's much more interesting.
Yeah.
So of course they watered it down and put Will Smith in it, and
Well, yeah, I like Will Smith, but
Yeah.
I can think of another good one. This is a graphic novel, but maybe you guys have read this. But it's Y, the Last Man. Have you
Nope.
guys read that at all?
I haven't.
It's about I guess it's a pandemic, and it basically wipes out all of the men on the planet, and there's one guy left, and basically there's just all women. And so women are basically running the country. You know, there's a female president, and they're kind of carrying on as if, you know, as if men don't exist. And he's like thrown into this world, and he's got like this pet monkey that's hilarious. You know, so that's a good one. It's pretty. I like. You don't see this very much, but I think the idea of post-apocalyptic comedy is really interesting. Like, you don't see it very often, you know, because it's like, oh, it has to be dark and morbid, you know, but like, I think that's pretty cool. I'd like to see more people write stuff like that.
It's got to be at least some people's coping mechanism, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Or like the TV show that's on now, if you guys have seen it, The Last Man on Earth, which it's a post-apocalyptic comedy. Like, you would never think the two would go together, but it's hilarious in just the storytelling. Like, you can really get into the characters' heads.
Well, and it is possible to
humor.
do it. It is possible to do it too without being overtly funny. Like Zombieland, I think would be a great example. Like that movie has some really funny moments in it. It walks a really nice line of being scary, funny, and sweet.
it's interesting when you keep mentioning The Last Man. This is something I never knew until I was reading up a little bit about sort of the origins or how far back can you go for apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic fiction. It was like Mary Shelley wrote a novel in 1826 called The Last Man, which some people consider the birth of modern apocalyptic fiction. But then there was another French guy that wrote another one called The Last Man, like 20 years before that influenced her as well. That was talking about like a plague-infected world. So even though some people, you know, because I've seen some things talking about post-apocalyptic where they talk about The Road as being like one of the first works of post-apocalyptic, and you're like,
What?
that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, I don't know where I saw that, but it just didn't make any sense at all. Like,
Oh, that's just silly.
I know.
I mean,
and
yeah,
now you're
that's
going back like
funny.
almost 200 years or really 200 years for people writing about this.
And the road wouldn't be on my list simply just because I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I've read some other stuff by Cormac McCarthy, but I haven't read The Road.
The Old Man in the Wasteland by Nick Cole, because it was mentioned a few weeks ago when I was talking about The Old Man in the Sea, and Dave Higgins was asking if I'd read that, which I have, and that's another interesting one. I can't remember what the apocalypse is. It's not really about that. It's about this old man going out into the wasteland, and the book has a relationship to The Old Man in the Sea because it's his favorite book, and he's read it a ton of times, and it's an interesting. It's a shorter story. I read it a few years ago, so I can't remember too much about it, but it was good.
Well, since you mentioned Wasteland, I have to take the slight tangent to say one of the, you know, in my younger days, one of my favorite video games ever was the video game Wasteland, like the computer game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you guys ever played it. They've remade a version now that's like very like, you know, the graphics are amazing as opposed to like the neon version that they had back in that day. But that was an awesome video game of a post-nuclear Nevada and Arizona and whatever they had to wander around. And
Let's not
zombies.
get too deep into like post-apocalyptic video games, or we'll start.
There's a ton of them.
I'm just
We'll
saying
start
that was classic in like the late '80s, early '90s. So
We can talk about Fallout for the rest of the night. Like,
Or The Last of Us. Come on, you know.
yeah. What else? I recently had read the Peter Cline's Ex-Heroes series. I think I read the first 3 books, and I know there's at least 4, if not 5. And that's the one where superheroes have gathered as many humans as they can in the lot of Universal Studios and kind of blocked that off as kind of a last-ditch effort to protect everyone from the zombies, and that's a great one because it's that mashup of superheroes and zombies, and it's a really cool series, comic book, but written out. Loved that one. And I can't remember what it was you mentioned. I think because you said Contagion, but I was thinking of the sort of stories then more are not post-apocalyptic, but we get to see the apocalypse sort of happening, which is put me in mind of Scott Sigler's series Infected, Contagious, and Pandemic, which is more aliens sending a probe to Earth, or all through the universe, I believe, but this particular one has come to Earth, and it keeps launching things into the atmosphere and infecting their people and kind of learning more about us and learning better ways to infect us and eventually doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's another one that's extremely gory and a lot of fun if you like your horror side of the apocalypse.
I was interested. I was going to make a sort of general comment of it's when you read little articles, like some of the articles talking about the history of the genre as apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, and saying, well, it really came into its own because of World War II, and then sort of the way that humanity was dealing with the horrors of World War II, and then the horrors of the atomic bomb and stuff. But then it's really popular now, and and there's been this rebirth in the last how many years. And we just see so much, whether it's TV or movies or books, and all the zombie stuff. So, do you guys have any thoughts on that? Of like why now? Why it's so popular today?
Well, I remember reading something about zombies specifically and why they're so popular. One idea of it about where it's because people are everywhere, and damn it, crowds are scary, and masses of humanity, and it's just that. Fear of people, but I think we also see that we're having more of a fear of technology and tiny things and bugs. Like the things we're afraid of have gone from being people to like zombies and big things like nuclear war to
war and bombs to
viruses, nanobots. We've gone from the macro to the micro as far as sort of what we're afraid of, because technology can do all kinds of insidious things to us, and that's where the robots and the nanobots and things like that come in.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what people are reading 50 years from now. Because it seems like it's the post-apocalyptic thing was kind of late. You have World War II and you've got the Cold War, and you really didn't see it take off until the last 20, 25 years. So maybe it's because a lot of the fear and the stigma around that sort of thing has kind of faded in a way.
But that stuff's been around for a lot longer than that. You had zombie movies going back to the 60s and 70s, right? And even you had The Blob, which Steve McQueen's first movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those things have always been there. Those types of stories have been around, but just like everything else these days, the proliferation of technology has let so many more people create so much more. It's everywhere. You could probably say, if you were a fan of the romance genre, there's a lot more romance available to us these days.
Yeah, that's true. It's just that the genre just evolves. It's different shades of like the post-apocalyptic that's being written today. In terms of tone, it's much different than it was 40 years ago. It seems to me it's a lot more gory, and there's it just covers more stuff. And maybe you're right. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that everyone can publish these days. But
and we've I don't know. I don't really want to say we've matured as a society. That's probably wrong. That's definitely wrong. But do you think how would 50 Shades of Grey have been received 20, 30 years ago outside of very specific bookstores, that you wore a raincoat to go into? So
that's true.
And you see what you look for, right? So I specifically would say I see a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction because it's a genre that I enjoy and I go looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
How about, it's funny just talking about that time difference. Look at what's happening with movies and stuff too. Like Mad Max came out 30 years ago, and now Mad Max is out again, with the same sort of stuff. And like,
there's a good post-apocalyptic.
Right? Like,
yeah, it's the new thing to take movies that were, pop or not popular or not popular back in the day and remake them.
Yeah, but I mean that's just an interesting particular one of the post-apocalyptic version of that, right? Like, so you don't get as many of that as compared to some of the other things. So
yeah, it'd be you could say the same thing too with there's seems to be a resurgence in superhero movies right now, and that would definitely be true as well.
Yeah, that's true. That's one of those genres that seems to have stayed stagnant, at least in terms of movies. I haven't read too much superhero fiction, like actual novels, like the X-Heroes, but it seems like that's a genre that keeps trying to reinvent itself, and I think movies are kind of saving it.
Yeah, it seems like most genres that I can think of off the top of my head kind of have a constant flow right now, except for the Western. The Western seems to be something that every once in a while somebody will maybe be, and I don't know, maybe for some strange reason they're more expensive to film than just to slap Indian makeup on Johnny Depp and make a shitty Lone Ranger movie. I don't know. I haven't even seen it. I haven't even seen it, so I can't.
I haven't seen it either.
Honestly, it was actually decently fun. I think it was just a disaster of an idea, because like my dad is the only person in my family that would have a nostalgic, wow, that's cool that this movie is coming out, and my dad is not taking my kids to see it, so it didn't make sense in any way. Cool Lego sets came out of it though.
I think it's interesting, like, to mix, like you're mentioning westerns and post-apocalyptic. Like, it's interesting to see different genres take on post-apocalyptic, because
there was. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because it's typically considered to be a subgenre of science fiction, right? But technically, you could make anything post-apocalyptic. I mean, you could make a western post-apocalyptic. I mean, a post-apocalyptic technically in some ways is a western. If you have
they did Cowboys versus Aliens.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't call that. That's more apocalyptic, right? I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Well, it looks like a crappy movie. Yeah.
It is.
It's the best premise ever, but it's a crappy movie.
It was terrible.
Isn't the original post-apocalyptic fiction what came after the flood? Right? Like, in whatever culture was writing about their flood.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about it like that.
It's like the post-apocalyptic historical fiction, right? Like, you can
post-apocalyptic fantasy. That's not something
after the Black Death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, when genres evolve, like, they just take on whatever the current events of the day are. Add 10, 20 years, because I think when you're actually in it, it's harder to comment on it. But when you're actually removed from it and you've got generations that don't remember it, maybe they romanticize it a little bit and take it and make it their own.
Write that. Everyone went quiet. We're trying to figure out.
Sorry, I was just looking back to my list to see if there's anything I forgot to mention. So.
Yeah, Google.
I think we all did that at exactly the same time, and then we did that. So. Sorry, everyone listening.
That's going to sound funny on the audio.
Yeah.
That's okay. Awkward silence. We've been doing this for 50 episodes now. You'd think that we wouldn't have those awkward silences anymore, but
we'll just blame Google.
That's not our fault. To our credit, that's Google's fault. That's not us.
Sometimes it's Google's fault. And yeah, so I mean, 50 is kind of a landmark, and in 2 more episodes, we're going to hit our 1-year anniversary, and we have no idea what the heck we're going to do for that.
So if anyone has any ideas, put it in the comments and let us know what you think we should do to celebrate our 50 or 1 year.
All of the people who were guests over the past year to kind of come in and out, and
let's have the biggest hangout ever. Just invite 50 people.
Yeah, that won't break. Thanks, Google.
Yeah.
No, of course not.
What's the official limit? Is it 7 or 10?
10 talking, I think.
10 talking, okay. Because I know they do like hangout events where people can tune in and watch. And that's as many people as you want, but yeah. Yeah, please email us or drop us a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
And that's in general, not just particularly for the annual.
Of course, but especially for our anniversary episode. Especially when we hear from the listeners on it.
So we'll wrap this up. Any final comments? I'm out.
Nope.
Good.
We're good? Okay. So we'd love to hear from you, our listeners. You can send us an email at tbrpodcast@gmail.com. Be sure to visit our Goodreads page and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and iTunes. And the link for the iTunes is down below. So we will talk to you next week. We don't have a topic yet, but we will post it when we come up with it. So have a good week.
Take care.
Happy reading, everybody.